go live. Should work.
Awesome. So I'm Sid, CEO and co-founder of GitLab, and this is our general group conversation. So if anybody has a question, please speak up. If not yet, I'll quickly go over our slides. There's a couple of slides. So GitLab is in the top 2% of companies if we manage to keep up our IACV, our gross margin, and go public next year. We would do that at an unheard of revenue growth and great gross margin. So we'd be considered a really, really good company. So top 2% company means top 2% output. Like our bar is a lot higher than everybody else's. We have to be a lot more efficient. We're not a regular company if we manage to do what we intend to do next year, and we have to hold ourselves to a higher standard. Also have a slide about handbook first. It's so hard to keep doing at scale. I don't know of another company that has an up-to-date handbook. The only reason we have one is because it's handbook first, but it requires extra effort. It requires a great handbook engineering team, so we're going to invest more in that. But I kind of need everyone's support. Like, if you want to make a change that has to end up in the handbook, please make a merge request. Please don't make a Google Doc or a presentation or an email or something like that. RATC is a thing we made, an acronym we made up, but it's about who's responsible, accountable, consultant, and informed. At GitLab, that should be pretty simple because we have a DRI, and that person is responsible and accountable. Who's consulted and informed? That should be everyone. Our mission is everyone can contribute. And lastly, I think it might be intuitive to a lot of people, but just to prevent us from ever forgetting that if you need to do something, don't go through the layers of hierarchy. Try to work it out with the person first directly, and escalate up if you encounter a problem, but never make people go through a hierarchy to achieve something. Ben, you want to verbalize your question?
Yeah, thanks. So I had a look through the presentation, and I noticed on those columns with all the company names, in the last one is the this GM percentage target in points. I don't know what that means. And the other interesting thing I noticed is that 0 isn't at the top; it's part way down. I was just curious what that column was all about.
I think it might not be a really good one. Distance to gross margin target. So our net margins target. Oh, distance to gross margin target. I think we're at 85% is our target, and I think we're doing even better than that. So I think that's why we're on top. I think our gross margins right now are about 89%. So we're doing better than our target. I think that's what it is. It's 4 points. It kind of jibes with what the 4 that's to the left of us. But if someone knows that better, please let me know. And by the way, another way of thinking about this is what's your net margin? Like, how much profit are you making? Your EBITDA plus your growth rate. And that should be above 40%. That's the rule of 40. That's not something they look at, but that's something we certainly look at internally.
Thank you.
William, you want to verbalize your question? Sorry for not letting you finish typing.
Absolutely. I was thinking of the slide about handbook first. A lot of folks who are new to the company and may not have seen how advantageous this is. I was wondering if you could share a story of a time you saw something happen handbook first, and maybe share the benefits of that process out of that story. And then, if possible, without calling somebody out specifically, if there's a time something didn't happen handbook first, if you know the story, if you could share the negative consequences.
Yeah, thanks. That's great. And people, people joining the call have a great example or good example, please say so. I think a lot of, I'm not going to give a specific example, can't think of one for right now in a positive sense, but I think a lot of people who joined the company saw our handbook beforehand, and it's every other company I've been at, they do have a handbook, but it's not what people actually do. So GitLab is the first company I know that at scale actually does what's in the handbook. And that makes it so much easier to kind of opt into the organization, join us, because you know what's actually going on. It makes it also a lot easier to change processes. And the handbook is not to pin people down to a certain way of working. It's to make it changeable. And I think that's a counterintuitive thing. People think like, oh, because it's written down, we always have to do it like that. No, we wrote it down to make it easy to change. And I love the power of that. If you want to change how we award bonuses, make a proposal. And after it's done, and you can refer to it. And this morning, my wife asked, hey, how do you do net promotion score for people who interview at GitLab? And I was just able to point her at the section of the handbook, and it had the exact question we're asking. Now, it didn't have an embedded graph yet with our scores, but that's going to be soon. But that's so powerful. And after, I think maybe some people on the call want to tell about how they thought about joining after seeing that, because I think that's the 3,000 applicants we have every week for our jobs. I think a huge portion of that is attributable to the handbook and the secondary order effects of that. So I'll open it up for people to chime in.
Sid, I was going to share a story of our first interaction that you probably don't remember, but for me, when I joined, it was very related to the handbook. I had read a lot of it and was impressed. And so I told you that when we met in Greece for the first time, and your first reaction was, that's great, Brendan, but what is written one way, but we do it some way different now that you're here? So I think it's an important example of how you live that every day, and we all can learn from that. You asked an employee on their 4th day to go find something that was wrong and fix it. And you trusted me to do that. And you said, hey, Slack me when you find it. And then I did it that night and fixed something. So I just think that's a story I tell candidates about how real it is that we live our handbook, that was your first reaction to a new employee talking to you about it.
Yep, and thanks for that. Thanks for sharing that story. John, you want to verbalize your question?
Sure, thanks, Sid. My question is about global optimization, which is one of the kind of bullets under our results value in the handbook. And, as I kind of try to wrestle with choosing between different, priorities in my own kind of to-do list, I'm curious if our OKRs page is listed based on priority. The current kind of design of that page has things listed in numerical order, and I'm just wondering if that's based on priority or if that's just kind of done for organization and readability.
Yeah, that's a great question. Thanks for asking that. The ordering is not significant, and it would be great if we can add that to that page. So if there's any volunteers for that, please do it in I'm going to call them the show notes. They're just the notes. But it's not significant. The reason we put a number to it is that it's easy to refer to a certain point. So if you're in a meeting, you can say, oh, what about 7B or something like that? So I recommend that if you do something at GitLab, you always use numbering, and even if the ordering isn't significant, and we don't imply that because there's numbering, there's an ordering or there's a limited set, which is the normal meaning of numbering. The OKRs are designed in a way that you can have only 3 per person or per team or per responsibility. So the goal of that is to constrain the number of objectives and key results. And therefore, we hope that everything that is in the OKRs is important, but we don't make an ordering within that. So thanks for asking. Danielle, what's your question?
Hey, Sid. I'm curious what your thoughts are on the long-term impact of our user conferences. I threw in an example here just of around educating customers in the market, but I just was wondering, will we ever have a Moscone size event that goes way beyond GitLab users? Like, just kind of where do you see it going?
Yeah, hopefully. I think conference certainly do something that's hard to achieve with other means. Bring those people together. Getting customers up on stage and talk about GitLab has been extremely powerful. Like, we got more content, we got more videos up of customers talking about GitLab than ever before. I think people feel really energized. There's something to being present somewhere, and it created a lot of energy. So as far as I'm concerned, based on the first one, it's a great success, and I'm very excited. I'll fly out to London later today, and we hope they will grow. Healthy things grow, and our conference is no exception. Thinking about Moscone size conferences, and Moscone is the big center here in San Francisco. I think hopefully we'll rent that one day. I do want to mention that I think that there's so much interest in all remote working that might be a shortcut to selling out Moscone. I think if we intensify our investments in all remote, I think we can sell that out, which is a bit weird because that would mean that Salesforce would sell something out with software as a service, which is Dreamforce a software as a service event or a Salesforce event? I think by now it's a Salesforce event. I wonder whether back in time it was kind of the definitive SaaS event. Right now, SaaStr and conferences like that are that. But I don't know. I've never been, because I was in the Netherlands, I've never been interested in in-person events, and I've never attended them back in the day. So if someone has an opinion about that, please speak up.
Thank you.
Thanks. And if you have a question, just speak up directly. No need to type it in.
This is Derek here. Since there's no questions, I'm just kind of curious, are there any new habits or any single habit that you may have picked up semi-recently that's been useful to you?
Oh, that's a great question. I don't know. What comes to mind is my CEO coach did a 360 feedback, and the biggest point was that I have to be more, I'm very content focused. For example, if you look at other group conversations, I think there should be questions on there from the start. So since they're not, I'll start asking questions, and I end up like having half of the airtime of a group conversation. And it's like, well, my questions are decent, but what about what signal is that sending? Is this like the CEO reviewing stuff? Is it really everyone can contribute, or is it just the CEO doing that? Like, be conscious of not just the content, but also like what you say, where you say it, what signal it sends, and what culture you're creating with that, and what's that telling people about you and how we run the company. And that's very valid feedback. So I haven't learned it yet, but that will be a thing I'll try to do better at. And maybe to tie it back to the handbook conversation earlier, sometimes when someone does great work, the first thing out of my mouth, like a couple of days after they joined, is, oh, this is great. Well, sometimes I don't even say, this is great. Why isn't it in the handbook? Sometimes it's just, why isn't this in the handbook? Two things, I should be way more conscious of not just what I say content-wise, but also what signal it's sending. Second thing is, I shouldn't try to like create a handbook first culture just by myself. So we'll also make it a promotion criteria. You cannot become a director until you've shown that you can enforce that and things like that. So basically, two things wrong. be more conscious of the culture you're creating and the leadership signals you're sending. Second thing is, hey, if there's anything you're still doing by yourself, that's wrong. You should take a step back and make sure, how do we enforce that? How do we implement that? Just like in our values section, we have 11 ways in which we reinforce our values. In our handbook section, we're going to have a section about how we reinforce handbook first.
Cool, thank you.
Thanks for asking.
Hey, so this is Jessica. I have a question for you. I see that you're out there quite a bit speaking at conferences. You're on Bloomberg. Have you always been comfortable with public speaking? And if you are, what do you do to prepare yourself? But if you haven't been always comfortable with public speaking, what have you done to actually help you become more at ease with this?
Thanks for asking. To prepare, so to answer your question, yes, I've always been comfortable public speaking. I love that it's a very constrained and defined format. You know exactly what's going to happen. You know what you have to do. I struggle much more with like, by now I'm okay, but in the past, like with social settings and small talk, it was so diverse and so undefined, and so the goals were so implicit that I struggle with that a lot more. And to prepare, I basically go over what we want to get on the air. Basically, like for example, Bloomberg interview is, I think, the pinnacle of this. You don't know what questions they're going to ask, but you know what you're wanting to say. So it's getting a bit like, it's a bit more like politics, that whatever the question you got asked, you always want to make sure you say what you wanted to say. And in the last Bloomberg interview, I did that 3 out of 4 times. So there's room to improve. The one I didn't nail was about recent things on the stock exchange and about investors becoming more picky. And I should have tied that back to us delivering customer value. And I didn't. I made a generic statement about the markets. That's not what I'm there for. But three out of 4 isn't super bad. And the next time I'll try to nail the other one. So basically you go over what do I want to say? And it's only a few minutes. So if you have a couple of talking points ready, should be good. Thanks, Jessica. Josh?
Yeah, I was just, this might be actually more appropriate for the sales GC if it comes up, but I just noticed that we missed our IACU target, looks like for 2 months in a row. I was just curious what your thoughts on the trend, and then more importantly, if there's any sort of small decisions or actions like the team can make similar to what we did with availability velocity to help out with the team.
Yeah, thanks for that. Certainly a worrying sign, and right now we're not on track for the quarter. We're slightly below, which is not great. I think we hit like at least 8, I think 10 quarters in a row. So we'd love to get there. And there's no one generic answer, but yeah, do remember that we had this as our number 1 goal in the company, and we should really try to hit it. But the answer is different depending on your role. Like in marketing, we should be looking at every single lever we can pull to still get some enterprise business in the pipeline for Q4. In product, we should make sure that not only do we ship great features, but also how we communicate those and make people, and that they're on by default, and that they work and that they actually get used. And same for that throughout the company. But I don't think there's one for everyone. Otherwise, we definitely do that. If people do have an idea, please put that in. But thanks for asking. Thanks for reminding everyone. Danielle?
So when I was shadowing you last week, I learned about messy foo, and I'm realizing how much of the handbook I still need to read as a result of that. But I've been applying it as a lens to writing Miltano's docs and our marketing, so thanks for that. I'm wondering how it ended up in the handbook. Is there a story about kind of why it got added, or a situation that came up? I just am really curious.
It's an example of, like, I was always complaining about naming things. And it was like, if you want to name something, please please ask me because I have opinions about naming. So I was putting myself in all those situations. And it's super frustrating for people. People thought of names and then, oh, Sid came with his complaints. So I really started thinking about like, what are all the situations and what is the feedback I've been given? And I think MESSIFU, which stands for mutually exclusive, collectively exhaustive, few words, and ubiquitous. It basically means, hey, if you have terms, make sure they don't overlap, make sure that they spawn all different cases, make sure there are few words so people don't leave words off and we have something undefined, and make sure they're ubiquitous. They always mean the same thing to everyone. So really messy word, and not MESSIFU word, so maybe messy is the opposite of MESSIFU, is enterprise. Enterprise can mean many things depending on many contexts. So, and I think I've been able to kind of outsource my job that way. So that's been a really great thing. And if you want a reminder how counterintuitive language is, or how not MESSIFU language can be, there's a word which I forgot for a statement that's the opposite. I think it's not the anagram, it's something else. Maybe someone can help me. It starts with an A.
Antonym?
Antonym. Thank you, Danielle. There are words that are auto-antonyms that are the opposite of themselves. And I was just flabbergasted. I was like, no, that doesn't exist. But yes, it exists. Google it. And an example was weather. This person weathered the storm. It means they stood strong and they survived the storm without getting affected too much. But if a piece of wood is weathered, it really was affected by the outside environment. And there's a couple of links already in it's mind-blowing that these words exist to me. But we don't want them at GitLab. We want things to have defined meaning to enable us to communicate better. Emily, you want to close this out?
Yeah, thanks, Sid. So there's been a big company-wide performance indicator push at the functional level and then even down to the individual job family level. I'm curious, as GitLab continues to grow and as we become what we're going to become over the next year, how do you see people using these performance indicators in their roles?
Yeah. So with measuring things, it's always, I was for a long time very, very worried about like, if the measurement becomes the goal, or if the goal becomes influencing the measurement, you get all kinds of bad side effects. So I was reluctant to implement them. But then when you think about how many times that actually happened, it never happened. I've never seen us displaying bad behavior just to prop up the measurements. So I kind of have to cut all of us a lot more slack. We have great people. We have managers that are not like cross-functional. They actually know what their reports are doing. And we're growing really, really fast. We're growing from 400 to 1,000 people this calendar year. And that means that there's one of the biggest problems is like not knowing what to do. I think it's the 4th factor or something on our biggest risks page. And it's so demotivating to join a company and say, hey, I don't know what's expected of me. And like people don't say that because they think like, oh, apparently something is expected. Everyone else figured it out, but I haven't figured it out. And you don't know what to do. The manager doesn't know what to optimize for, etc. That's a much bigger and more common problem. So we're trying to add performance indicators to every team, to every job family, and make sure that at least we know what we're optimizing for. And we'll deal with, eventually, if you push it far enough, we'll have people optimizing for the measurement instead of the outcome for the company. But that seems at this moment a much lesser worry than us, than not knowing what's expected of you. I haven't seen that, but you know that if you grow, that's one of the biggest risks. And we're trying to help with that. And looking forward to working with you to get those embedded graphs everywhere. And I'm so far, I think I've seen people responding favorably to that change. Thanks, everyone. Thanks for the questions. Appreciate it. Have a good week.